And so, Julia, this is his lowest approval rating in this particular poll. He's been in the 30s in some other polls throughout the past year or so. What's your reaction to this latest slump?
I think it has to trace back to the economy. We are seeing inflation continue to rise. We are seeing gas prices rise. And it's interesting that after the invasion of Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the White House's reaction to slap on those sanctions against Russia, we saw the White House go on this public relations blitz, essentially calling this Putin's price hike. And I think that looking at these polls, it shows that American voters aren't buying that. They recognize that way before this invasion of Ukraine, prices were going up and inflation was a real problem. What's interesting, though, is this poll is coming after a number of polls that were taken after the State of the Union earlier this month that showed Biden getting a bit of a bump, that post-State of the Union bump in the polls. And we've seen actually some other polling that shows that a lot of Americans approve of his decisions to slap sanctions on Russia, and Americans are very much appear to be united according to data in getting tough economically on Russia in the wake of the invasion. But I think this polling shows that that's not enough to relieve this slump Biden finds himself in, that it's once again tracing itself back to the economy and Americans disappointment in how that's being handled.
Yeah, I think it's one thing to say that Americans are broadly supportive, or at least they understand the steps the administration is taking with respect to Russia, but that doesn't mean they like Biden any better for it. And Philip, it seems like his numbers only move generally in one direction. And how bad will it be months from now when election time rolls around?
Well, there is a little bit of an echo of last summer in the numbers that we're seeing right now, when you see that the majority of Americans, they supported ending the war in Afghanistan, but they also disapproved of the way that the Biden administration removed the United States from that conflict. So while it's certainly possible to see a majority of Americans saying that they stand with Ukraine, that they oppose Russian aggression in the region, that doesn't necessarily translate to those same Americans giving the White House props for how they're dealing with the war. Obviously, polling is not the most important thing when it comes to a land war in Europe, but I think that is one factor here. In terms of how far the president can slide, the polling that you just referenced, that's roughly in line with what we've seen from the Real Clear Politics average for some time now. I think that while a lot of the focus rightfully is on the economy, is on inflation, which is now becoming expected inflation among consumers, I think that if we rewind again back to August, September of last year, when we see the bottom fall out for Biden in terms of approval ratings, is during the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, and then also when COVID did not sort of take a back seat. I think that it's possible that as the pandemic, is in the rearview mirror, that maybe that pressure is alleviated. Maybe we see the president's numbers sort of stabilize. But right now, this is certainly, this is the kind of polling landscape that you expect when you're in line for a shellacking in the House.
Joe Biden, we're not fully aware what the extent is of his knowledge or involvement. But Joe Biden, you have to remember, Joe Biden thought he was out right. of the political game. Mm-hmm. He thought he was done. He chose very publicly not to run for president in 2016, right. to step aside. The writing was on the wall that the party wanted Hillary. Hillary wanted Hillary. It was her time. And
Obama wanted Hillary.
Right. So
his own president.
He decided not to put up a fight, and he was going to go gently into that good night. Yeah. And you know what? There's temptation to make a buck if you're done anyway.
He made a fortune from the University of Pennsylvania.
Sure.
Millions, right? For teaching or maybe $800,000 or something for teaching
just normal salaries for,
yes.
What was he teaching, the football team?
Penn football, the basketball team. So if you think of Biden's mindset at that point, Joe Biden's mindset as post-politics,
right?
The way that we do this in the U.S. is you cash in on your name, and you don't do any work.
No.
you don't, and you don't,
Golden
you
parachute.
don't need a key. You're not showing up to the office. But you get on a conference call.
Right.
You allow your name to be used to grease a transaction.
Now, Trump had no need to. He'd do that still as president.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to. He doesn't see that difference. But
it's not
any normal political actor waits till they're done, and then not at all.
And it's not whataboutism to laugh at the asymmetry here. Like the same people who were so furious at the corruption of Hunter Biden, like, oh, it's fine that Jared Kushner, while working for the White House, was shaking down like sheikhs around the Middle East for money for his business.
It's not. You can't get around the whataboutism here. Yes. There's wild corruption among the children in both families. So that's just the truth. Anyway, journalist Glenn Greenwald tweeted in response, "Just effing amazing." Now, the Washington Post, 10 days after the New York Times, admits that the laptop genuine and uses them in their reporting, yet not one corrupt outlet has retracted the Russian disinformation lie that Biden initially banked this story on during campaign debates. However, the fact checkers over at MSNBC have found no evidence of this. Here's Mika Brzezinski after discussing Trump's claims that Hunter received money from Russian oligarch Yelena Baturina.
He goes on to repeat, I think Putin now would be willing to probably give that answer. I'm sure he knows. Trump's claims are false. We fact-checked them earlier in the show.
Oh, are you put at ease? Even CNN is half-heartedly covering the story. Did a write-up yesterday headlined, "The Federal Investigation of Hunter Biden Heats Up," while a legal analyst on the show said there's a real chance Hunter could be indicted over the foreign business dealings. Yeah, I can see this going with the media in a Republicans pounce on Hunter Biden direction, which is something they do when something I've often noticed, and other people on the right have noticed, that when essentially the thrust of the Republican criticism is correct, the media frames it as how Republicans are using this to get ahead, rather than about how they're just correct about the thing.
Well, that's how the media knows how to cover, particularly the political media knows how to cover any issue.
Right.
Like what's its effect?
On
what's
the
its
horse
effect
race.
on the horse race, and how are the different parties using it to their own particular advantage? Because then you don't have to get into kind of the nuts and bolts of the issue question. Glenn, of course, Glenn and I don't know if I've told you this, Glenn and I actually started reporting together on the story that led to him leaving The Intercept eventually. I wanted to take it in a more China direction. He wanted to take it in the Ukraine direction. So we're like, all right, so you do your piece, I'll do my piece. And I'm working on my piece, and the next thing I hear is, oh, Glenn quit. So
recently you had a bunch of videos taken off of YouTube, completely removed, like 600 something videos. What is exactly going on?
Yeah, I mean, this was the culmination of this years-long kind of censorship campaign that ended up with the establishment really completely purging all Russian-affiliated media content. And that includes just archives, huge swaths of anti-imperialist content from the likes of myself, Chris Hedges, and Lee Camp. These were 500 plus episodes of my old show, Breaking the Set, that ended in 2014. This did not violate the terms of service of YouTube's content management. This was simply political. This was tech giants acting on behalf of the US government to toe a certain narrative to bolster this foreign policy consensus.
And Abby, for people who aren't familiar with RT, can you lay out like what the network was and what the relationship is with the Russian government? Because I think some people have the impression that it's just kind of a state-run propaganda outfit, but it's a little more complicated than that.
It is. I mean, look, I look at the purview of all media kind of the same way. Everyone has questionable funding, and it's a matter of us as critical thinkers who are pushing media literacy to actually navigate all of these biases, advertising and sponsorship of all corporate media and state media. Russia Today is funded by the Russian government. It's in the name, Russia Today. It's very obvious. And it's up front, right? So I think that you know that you're not going to necessarily get the truth about Russia watching Russia Today, but it offered a platform for anti-war dissidents. And this is a really fascinating aspect of the story that's being left out with all of these churned out formulaic pieces that just kind of give this Kremlin top-down propaganda machine, this kind of legacy painting without actually analyzing why RT existed. Why was it popular? It filled a gaping void in the corporate media that had failed to talk about third parties, failed to talk about anti-capitalist issues, and failed to uplift those voices on the margins, these fringe voices from across the political spectrum. And that's exactly what RT did. I don't think that we have to be in denial about why we were hired. But I think that it's really instructive when you look at actually what the US government said itself in its intelligence report that was supposed to be this end-all be-all indictment of Russian propaganda. It wasn't about propaganda. It was about uplifting these issues that the US corporate media did not want covered.
Right. And I think that's so interesting. What do you make of this, somewhat new reality where the calls for censorship or for aggressive content moderation on various platforms is coming not just from the government, not just from, corporate interests or some kind of like narrow economic interest, but also from mainstream media, from media outlets that are progressive in some sense on some issues, saying that no, people should, this information is disinformation or we disagree with it. It should not be available for people to decide for themselves at all. I feel like this is the new ethos of the mainstream media, that these questions cannot be left to the people. It is totally for the gatekeepers to decide.
Exactly. I mean, we have tech overlords basically curating our reality and tasking themselves with determining what is and what is not truth. And that's a very scary thing because I believe in critical thinking. So I want all perspectives. I want to be able to navigate everything and decide for myself what is reality, what is truth, and not have Silicon Valley overlords who are acquiescing to US foreign policy goals, determining that reality for me. And it's very scary because, as you mentioned, these are for-profit corporations, right? And I hear this time and again, oh, well, it's a corporation, right? If you don't like it, get off their service. Well, not exactly, because when you are overriding your main priority as a corporation of profit maximization and actually curtailing profiting by acquiescing and towing the line of the US government and basically changing the algorithms to purge content, right? This content was making them millions of dollars in advertising and sponsorships, but they decided to actually basically tow propaganda. I mean, this is the main function, is censorship and propaganda. Tech monopolies are an arm of the US government. And I think that's been crystal clear. In the wake of the DNI report, we saw the algorithms change. There was no law in place mandating these companies to do that. They just decided to work with the government because these CEOs basically want to work with the class interests of the ruling elite in the US. And that means deeming every US adversary sinister, whether it's slapping that sinister state media propaganda label on the network or essentially purging them altogether. But you don't see the same state media label on Voice of America, on BBC, on the Kiv Independent, this new network that's popped up in everyone's Twitter feeds that also was in part funded by the US government. So it's just staggering levels of hypocrisy. And I think this is infantilizing. This is treating us like children and telling us that we need to basically give up our power to these CEOs to determine all of these things for us.